you see here, I'm dealing with a topic that may or may not be of interest to you. And again, I just chose a given random topic, and I thought that if you relate to recreation, especially with the weather as it's hopefully going to start changing, that'd be a plus. But I just chose a topic thinking, let's talk about how we can use this as a tool to, I guess, bring out awareness. I think sometimes we may have some lectures, and they're always wondering, is that important information? Is that really what we need to know? And when you have a bunch of information I'm going to throw at you, like, my gosh, I get confused between this fuel versus this fuel, this stove type, it can become a little bit more overwhelming. So what I'm going to try to do is have it where you do utilize this TurningPoint technology in the beginning, setting them up before we actually lecture, and then we actually do it afterwards. So if you don't mind, I'm actually going to do sort of like a little bit of a lecture, and then we'll see it at the very, very end. If you wouldn't mind, though, if you could please set our channel. You guys already set?
We were in here before.
Okay. Channel 55. So you hit your go button. While it's flashing red to green, push in 55. And then hit go again. And you should be ready to roll.
That's the old direction.
Is that right?
Those are the directions for the old ones where you had to hit the one when it was done.
Okay.
It doesn't hurt, though. It doesn't hurt to stick out.
All right.
They're trying to get those off the market.
We're good? Again, just my chosen topic is I'm just thought I'd talk about camp stoves and fuel. Again, I was thinking between using this and then also possibly using finance. You do any sort of type of lecture material, but I thought this is something you may have an interest in, at least you think you have some interest in, or some background in it towards if you've camped before. But now it gets a little more confusing. What would potentially be the best stove versus fuel types? So here's the first question I'd like to throw at you. About 12 seconds to answer it. Which fuel has the characteristics of heat output is low, cost is low? What do you think? You're going to see that this is going to come back at us at the very, very end. Again, let's just say this is something I have very, very important. There's the foundation of this given lecture, and therefore I'm going to see if you actually paid attention to the very end. Again, assuming that you guys aren't taking notes, that's not the purpose of this. You take notes of what is the best fuel source, but let's say this is very, very important, and I'm going to ask you again what this is. Again, I had about 50% of you think it was kerosene, and then I had 50% think it was denatured alcohol. That tells me that you're confused before we even start, which is good. We don't have everybody that's so knowledgeable of this given material that, you know what, I should probably even lecture on it. I see that we have some confusion that's involved. A little background on stoves. Oftentimes we think about, why do we need to have any kind of information about stoves? Stoves are stoves. Well, it's not really true, especially as of recent. You start seeing some of our federal areas, national parks, Forest Service, so forth. We have a lot of individuals that have been a little careless with the resources. We've had a lot of burning. That we've had a lot of policy changes towards us having to use a camp stove. I don't know how many of you actually go camping, and probably the old dream is that we always sit around a campfire. Well, you're going to find out that in many situations you can't use campfires anymore. So that dream of sitting around doing the marshmallows, you just can't do it. So then we have to identify what is potentially the resource that we can use. And again, what type of stove, and then also eventually what else can we use. Most of us here and most in this country, we just go on these little things that, maybe a couple hours in the day. We might do one overnight where, within 100 people. So the idea of what we're going to talk about here is choosing one stove over another stove, or one fuel type another fuel type. We're not traveling internationally to the point that this probably isn't as important to you as it is for individuals that do go on extensive courses. We do talk about the idea that if you do utilize some kind of a stove that might be of a cheaper nature and less expensive, it could actually be a situation where you not just have frustrations, inconvenience, but also could actually be a disaster. Life could be a jeopardy. So that's also important for us to think about. Other factors consider possibly efficiency in the wind. If you're in a very windy setting, one stove type over another, flame adjustability. Ease of use, and again, you don't just want to have it where you want to, because it's brand new, or if it's something you've been using for the past 3 or 4 seasons. You always want to see if you can actually test it out before you take it out in the field. Then finally, one of the last ones, talk about weight, size. There's different sizes of stoves that are available to you. You might say, I'm a minimalist, and I need just a small stove for what I need to use for this given circumstance. And then finally, stability. Again, if I'm in a rocky terrain, I need something that can be collapsible, can also have some kind of foldability as well. So again, just some basic information about stoves. One thing that does come up is that, if we talk about the wind, cold, altitude, one situation is, by me choosing the improper stove, I actually may put the lives of jeopardy. For instance, I choose, because it's so nasty, it's rainy, it's cold, my stove doesn't work so well, so I bring it inside my tent. Therefore, you build up the carbon dioxide, possibly die, possibly also the flammability of these given tents. Again, because you chose the improper stove. Safety features, repairability. Again, there's a lot of individuals that go out there and they go in the wilderness. They chose the wrong stove. They don't know how to repair it, and therefore it's useless, and therefore they have to abort their program a little early. Then also the idea of considerations of fuel availability. You might truly desire to have one fuel type, let's say unleaded gasoline or kerosene, but that's not available at that given time. Having multi-fuels where worst comes to worst, you find yourself that you're stuck, you may want to choose one over the other. And then finally, cost. Again, yes, I might say that I have infinite amount of resources available, so therefore I go with one type versus, I only have $25, $30. What's my best stove for that money? Here's another question for you. How many liters of white gas would you need for 5 campers on a 7-day Florida outing in July? Didn't look like too many people actually had a response for that one. I did put a 12-second response. We had, I guess the individuals that did respond, we had everybody think it was 5 days. What was the first button? We'll see if that holds true. Fuels. General rule about fuels. Again, what I just try to do here is I try to get your awareness. Oh my gosh, I have no clue. You have 5 days, you got 7 individuals, you got this, you got that. How do you know? So therefore now what I do is I followed up with some kind of a slide that actually explains this. And here's the general rule is that you would need 1 quart of liquid fuel typically if you have one person for 7 days. So if I'm doing a 7-day outing, I only have one individual, how many quarts do I need? 7 days, 1 person. How many quarts? 1. Just 1. Make sense? So if I'm going solo by myself for a week out there in the wilderness, it's amazing how when you take people in the outdoors, they think they need to have everything. I have people that carry, when I've done programs even for camps, kids have had pistols in their gear, thinking they're going to see bears and all these other animals. Well, if I was to say, okay, open loose, and I'm dealing with this program for college students, I says, okay, we need to come up with some kind of plan for our food. It's amazing how much food they think they need to have. Well, another big issue is fuel. I don't want to carry all this fuel. So what's the rule? So if I roughly know that it takes about 1 liter, 1 quart of fuel for 7 days, for one person, then if I have 5 people, so forth, we can figure out how many liters. It doubles though. If you do have to melt your snow in order for to drink, you can't just eat snow. Granted, I do teach my kids that when it first comes down, you're safe probably, but after that first day, you have to not take that in internally. You have a lot of problems. But if you need to melt your snow, or if you need to boil prior to drinking, you need to double that. So now we're talking about 2 liters or 2 quarts per individual for a 7-day program. So now I got the information. Now it makes sense, and hopefully we'll be able to retain it for the later at the very end. And also we talk about the idea, I want to not just educate you about this, but how can we conserve fuel as well? Again, I can just burn. Fuel is amazing. It's almost like toilet paper in the outdoors. You wish you had some at the very, very end. Well, fuel, you're stuck. I really like to have that little extra cup of tea. I like to have that coffee. I like to have something. I don't have the fuel to do it. So therefore, you're stuck. So you talk about the idea of pre-soaking your food and all this other great stuff. Now, which of the following is an advantage of white gas stoves? Again, if you noticed, I'm changing the format as to how I'm identifying who has commented or not. Sometimes we have the bars down below, the grids. In fact, we were talking about how many people could actually be here. 40 individuals, let's say. It'd take up my entire slide, so I took those off just before today's presentation. Anyway, it takes up too much of my space. So anyway, to see what we said. We say again, 50% of you think that fuel spills evaporate quickly. 17% no insulation is important. Then also cost is very, very low. Nobody perceived that priming was an issue when it comes to white gas stoves. So again, I like this because again, you don't know this before we even start this information. So now we want to talk about it. White gas. Talk about the idea that it's available in the United States. Again, most people think that white gas is everywhere. I mean, everybody assumes it's Coleman fuel. No, it's here in the United States only. Heat output is very, very high. Cost is moderate. Flammability is very, very high. Again, this is one of those situations where if you don't do it properly, you can have a big blow up on you, and it's very, very dangerous.